I think what's maybe lost in some of the commentary around late diagnosis is this idea that it just solves everything. Like, well, I know I'm autistic, hooray, problem solved. And it is true in some ways, but then I think you do also go through a period of mourning because you do think, well, would my life have been different if I'd known earlier?
Welcome to Separate Bathrooms. My name's Clem Bastow.
I'm Elle.
She's my wife. We've been married for over 30 years.
It just makes me laugh that you always go, she's my wife.
I know.
Yep, same
I'm proud of
name.
it. I'm proud of it. Let's face it, we've been through some shit.
We have.
And I'm down another, what is it, sliding door window thing. We could have been in very different situations had it not been for your bravery and presence and willingness.
Aww.
And mine too.
And yours too.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, we're here.
100% on each.
We're here. Today, we're talking with a wonderful woman, Clem Bastow.
We are.
She began her career writing music reviews. Then she was an entertainment journalist, including a stint in Los Angeles, and then several years as a columnist for Fairfax writing feminist commentary.
Today she's a teacher of screenwriting at Melbourne University. She's doing a PhD in action cinema and autism at RMIT. She's also a co-host of Superfluidity on Triple R. Wow, she is one busy lady.
Yeah. She's also the author of a fabulous book called Late Bloomer, How an Autism Diagnosis Changed My Life. The title was inspired by Bastow being diagnosed with autism at the age of 36.
It's a memoir that traces her life from childhood until now. The Sydney Morning Herald writes that it's liberally accompanied by research into autism. It's illuminating, funny and accessible. The best kind of non-fiction which reads like a novel. I can't wait to talk to Clem. Let's bring her into the bathroom. Clem Bastow, welcome to Separate Bathrooms. It's an honour to have you in the bathroom with us.
It's so great to be here in the bathroom.
Oh, gosh, there's so much to talk about. You know, I'm so fascinated by your history. And, of course, we're going to talk to you about your book, Late Bloomer, How an Autism Diagnosis Changed My Life. But I just want to go back a little bit on your history because you've had this incredible career writing music reviews and journalism and now you're a teacher of screenwriting. Tell us about that.
Yeah. It was a very tortuous journey. So I guess I always wrote. Like that was something that I just always did in my spare time. I used to write little stories. We actually found one recently. Mum found it's this little book that's like the size of a 50-cent coin. And it was like I typed it up on her brother typewriter and you know, I guess that was my first published work in about 1986.
Oh.
But yeah, the screenwriting thing came about. I was a journalist for many years, started out in music, then kind of moved on to like, I guess what you would call entertainment journalism, so writing about film and TV. And then in my spare time, I just was sort of looking for a project to work on. I didn't have much on the go. You know, I was freelancing. And so I kind of remembered that when I was at high school, I really enjoyed screenwriting, like reading about it, reading them, the idea of making a movie. So I just started writing again. This is in about 2010. And then showed it to a friend of mine who was also a screenwriter and a teacher. And I just said, look, can you have a look at this and just see, you know, is this total nonsense? And it came back with some pretty funny notes on it, you know, whole pages crossed out. At one point he wrote, I wish this dragon would shut up. It was a fantasy.
Wow.
I probably should have contextualized. Yeah, it was a fantasy script. But at the end of that, I went, okay, well, maybe I'll pursue this. And then so in many ways, you know, I've been a late bloomer in many aspects of my life, but that really then gave me the impetus to go back to university. So I went back to uni in 2015 and did a Masters of Screenwriting, and here we are. Now I'm doing a PhD in screenwriting.
Ah, fantastic.
Amazing. So the book is called Late Bloomer, which you just said you're a late bloomer at most things in your life. Congratulations on the book. How is it being received?
Look, really well. I think, you know, I guess when you write a book these days, unless you're Stephen King, you know, you're not going into it hoping you'll put a down payment on a house. So for me, writing Late Bloomer was a way to, well, I guess understand my own experience, but to also provide a broader context to the autistic experience that I think we don't tend to get, because it's only been in the last few years, really, relative to the amount of time that autism has been discussed in a kind of clinical sense. It's only been really recently that autistic people have been able to kind of drive that narrative. So the idea of an autistic person speaking as the expert rather than deferring to, the psychologist, the clinician, the psychiatrist, it's still quite fresh. So what I wanted to do was use my own experience to contextualize some of these ideas about autism that I think for a lot of people are quite mysterious. They certainly were for me when I was diagnosed, but I know for parents of, say, for example, young kids who are diagnosed, you're told all of these things and kind of just expected to know what they mean. So they'll say things like, oh, your child is going to have, special interests or circumscribed interests. Well, what does that mean? So I thought, I'll write about how I was crazy about dinosaurs as a kid. And so in a way, I was kind of using my own experience as a kind of gateway, I guess, to understanding broader ideas about autism. Because I wanted, I'd worked as a journalist, I'd done the kind of first person essay thing, and I didn't really want it to just be, my story. I would have, what I preferred was this idea that I could kind of use my story to help other people, I guess. And that's the response has been really amazing, especially from other autistic people, and particularly people who are diagnosed later in life who feel like they've been kind of seen and heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. You've called it a time traveling memoir. What do you mean by that?
So I guess for me, it's interesting because it's, the subtitle, Cam, like you said, is how an autism diagnosis changed my life. But in a way, it's sort of how it changed my life story, because I didn't know this about myself until I was 36. So I'm 40 this year. So the time traveling aspect of it was a way to, with this kind of roadmap, I guess, that you get from being diagnosed, go back and understand these experiences that I'd had, some of which had been, very mysterious to me. From the kind of, basic day-to-day stuff like why is it hard to go into a shop, or, why am I bad with numbers, or why is it hard to make friends, to kind of much more big existential questions. And I guess also because for me, one of the ways my mind works is I sort of talk about it a bit like a non-linear film, like often I'm just kind of daydreaming in the past. I'll be like working at my desk, but I'm thinking about a time, that we went on a family holiday or a gig that I went to. And I'm also kind of thinking about the future at the same time. So I sort of also wanted to reflect that different way of thinking. So, I mean, having said that, it's very funny because, of course, the book then goes, I'm diagnosed, let's go back to the start of my life and we'll work through pretty much chronologically.
Yeah. But what a amazing thing to do. I can only sort of imagine in that you've had the diagnosis at 36 and all of those little puzzle pieces that were always sort of sitting not quite linked up together, you were able to link them through the diagnosis, I would imagine. Is that what you're saying? It's
almost like breaking a code, and I suppose there is an element to which, what do they say? When you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So it is a process of going back and saying, okay, which of these experiences were kind of inherently because I'm autistic and which ones are just universal experiences?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so I suppose that was an interesting thing with the book too, was, looking at these experiences through that prism of autism, but there are many of them are things that a lot of people will have experienced.
Yeah.
So that I sort of think it was a way to, I guess, generate empathy in the reader, because a lot of people, I think, today still think of autism as it's quite an alien thing. There's not a lot of community understanding about it still. It's getting better.
Yeah.
So I sort of thought, if I can go, all right, well, here's my experience of dating, or here's my experience of the job market. That's something most people have been through. And so what I hoped would happen, and it's what people have said did happen when they read it, was that they would then be able to go, okay, cool. So, I remember a time when, something was too loud and I couldn't handle it. Okay, so now I've got a kind of just a hint of what it might be like to have sensory overload and things like that. So, yeah.
It's an interesting thing because you are a late bloomer. You came into the understanding that you had. Now, correct me very quickly. Does someone suffer from autism, or do you have autism? What's the best way to put it?
I say I am autistic. So there's I guess a debate, or there's sort of two schools of thought. There's this idea of person first, which is person with autism, and then there's identity first, which is autistic person. So for me, I can't separate my experiences, my selfhood from autism. And it's also something that in some, for all its challenges, I'm also proud of it. It's a difference that I have. So I choose identity first. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but typically when people say person with autism, has autism, suffers from, it comes from, I think, I choose to believe it comes from a good place, but I think where it's emerged from is this idea that often educators or parents are worried that, their kids will be labelled or they'll be teased. But the problem is when you don't have a label, an official one, you get worse ones. So for me, it's kind of a political thing, I guess.
Okay. Now, let's just, you've called it a time-travelling memoir, going back for you, what was it like growing up for you? And did anyone ever sort of look at you as, say, a 15-year-old and say, are you autistic? Or was there any clues like that at that point?
Oh, I mean, it's funny, actually. I say nobody did, but so I don't know if you've seen the film Parenthood, the Ron Howard film. There's this kid in it, Kevin, who's different, Kevin is what do they call him? A very good, very tense little boy. Yeah. And that was the kind of family joke that I was Kevin. And, I look back and I watch that film now. It's very clear to me that I think it's implied that Kevin is probably, at least on the autism spectrum, So there were moments where I talk about them in the book as these like sliding doors moments where there might have been a teacher who noticed that something was different or wrong, but then that was sort of the end of the story. There was never a kind of deeper investigation. And part of that was just because our understanding of autism has changed so much. So, when I was writing the book, I was talking to psychologists and clinicians who were working in the 80s, and it just would never have occurred to them. They often said that for young girls, they would only consider autism if there was like a comorbidity. So if there was also an intellectual disability. So there were these moments where people sort of were like, there's something weird about Clem, but nobody could quite put their finger on it. And I guess because it was only fairly recently that, we now have this understanding of the different ways in which autism can present. So it is often quite different in girls.
Yeah.
Not always, but often they will seem more outgoing. Their interests may be just as focused as their male peers, but they might not be in weird things. So we think of the kind of like stereotypical little autistic boy as being crazy about trains or like light switches, something that's a bit strange, for a 5-year-old. But for little autistic girls, it might be, horses or a particular celebrity. And so we sort of think of those things. We've been socialised to think of them as just like girl stuff. So,
right.
And little girls get crazy about things. So it's sort of you don't really think about it. So I guess for myself, because I was only really, new to this idea that it might have been a thing, I would often go online and do those, am I autistic BuzzFeed quizzes and kind of get an inconclusive answer and just kind of go back to the drawing board.
You came to understand that you had autism later in life at the age of 36. For our listener right now, who I would think is sitting here listening, you sound pretty together and normal. And my idea of autism is not that, but you sound pretty normal. What led you to this diagnosis? And after you were diagnosed, because there might be someone listening right now who's in their 30s, 40s, 50s going, yeah, but I've led this normal life, but there's something that is that I'm connecting with Clem here right now. Maybe I am autistic. I don't know. What led you to be finally diagnosed? And then once you were, how did it feel?
Oh, look, it was a kind of a build-up, I think, of small things. I think that's what's really important for people to understand is that often there's this idea that, if you're diagnosed later in life, it mustn't have been that bad, you made it this far. But often what leads people to seek diagnosis is it's kind of a last resort. So for me, I'd received some sort of nothing ever stuck. There was some sort of half-hearted, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Is it bipolar 2? Is it this? Is it, And every time I'd sort of go, well, you're the expert, so I'll sort of try and take that on board, and it just never really quite worked. And for me, I guess I was experiencing these challenges in a lot of areas of my life. So yeah, I agree, Cam. Like when I'm in performance mode, as I am now, that's something I love to do. But if you'd had a secret camera at the library yesterday at the university when they wouldn't let me in because the COVID safe system had crashed, like I just looked like the Tassie devil. Like, I was crying, I was like yelling, trying not to yell, constantly trying to say, look, I'm really sorry, this is my disability, I'm basically having a meltdown. So there were sort of moments like that where I would have these reactions to things that felt like they were at a kind of level that didn't seem to fit with what should be expected. So reactions to things like changes of routine, things going wrong, my favourite thing being taken off the menu at a cafe. And then in the kind of social realm, I guess, just a real sense of kind of bafflement about, how do you make friends and how do you keep them? It seemed to be really difficult. Saying the wrong thing often, wrong, in inverted commas. And yeah, I guess for me, the education thing, why, if I seemed to be this kind of smart, eloquent writer, could I not finish a university course? Like what was going on? I failed a whole semester of one because I was just so confused that I just stopped going. So for me at 36, it was like, well, I'm starting to think that this might be, all these experiences might be linked. And I guess I was lucky that at the time a friend of mine, their daughter was being diagnosed, and she was, I think, 8 or 9. But in kind of watching her go through that and recognising that there were these specialists who understood the sort of differences in experience for women and girls, I just thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gains or lost. I'm bad at turns of phrase. That's one of my autism things. But so I went to that same clinic, and it was a really, really interesting experience. At the time I spoke to my GP and I said, look, in a way I kind of felt embarrassed because I sort of felt like, well, if I haven't worked this out by now, maybe it's not really true. What's she going to think when I went in to get the referral? And she was great. She said, it's always good to know more about yourself. So I sort of approached it in a way with a bit of a writer's kind of, it was almost like a research thing. It was like, well, this will be interesting. But I'd been working on this screenplay and it had become clear through the drafting process and feedback from script editors and assessors that the lead character was herself autistic. So I'd also started to do some research into that. And as I was reading all these things online, I was kind of going, okay, yep, that's an experience I had. Yeah, that sounds like my childhood. So that was how I went into it. And when I got the news a couple of months later, congratulations, you're autistic. It was a massive thing. It's a real roller coaster. I think what's maybe lost in some of the commentary around late diagnosis is this idea that it just solves everything, well, I know I'm autistic, hooray, problem solved. And that is true in some ways, but then I think you do also go through a period of mourning because for me and for most other people that I've spoken to who've had similar experiences, you do think, well, would my life have been different if I'd known earlier? So
yeah, right.
Would school have been easier? Would I have gone to a different school or gone to school at all? Maybe I could have been homeschooled.
Yeah.
And so while I don't regret anything that I did because I think, if I hadn't done them, I wouldn't be here now. I look back at experiences I had, particularly like in the dating scene, experiences of being kind of targeted by unscrupulous at best, abusive at worst people. And I think, well, if I'd known, maybe I would have been more aware of that possibility, kind of on the lookout for predators. Maybe not, but just things like that and work and study and things. If I'd known, then maybe I would have been able to put supports into place that would have helped me keep a job. Because I've had a great career, but it's like any freelance industry, it's been very kind of hand to mouth. So I sort of think, if I'd known up front, maybe I wouldn't have become a freelance journalist, and I'd own a house now. So I think it's a really kind of beautiful, mixed, bittersweet experience, the diagnosis. There's this kind of immediate positivity, which for me was also political. It was like I wanted people to know that I thought this was inherently a good thing to know,
Sure.
that it wasn't like, here's the bad news. But yeah, then a sense of kind of mourning, and also mourning, I think, for an authentic autistic experience of the world, for better or worse. So, if you don't know that what your experience is autistic, for example, meltdowns, they're treated as tantrums. And so then it becomes this thing that you sort of try to force yourself not to do because you've been told it's naughty or, rude or bad. Things like that. So it seems like a funny thing to be like, I wish I could have an authentic meltdown. But it's very complex because, my brain and my body work in a way that is innate, but 36 years of, society telling me to do things differently means that, so I'm at the library having a meltdown because of the stressful nightmare of trying to get in and pick up my book, but I'm sort of constantly second-guessing myself and going, this looks rude, they think I'm angry, sort of trying to be, you're sort of stretched between two worlds a bit. You're almost like a kind of diplomat.
That would be hard, having a foot planted in both worlds. Because I guess on one hand, your conscious self knows that this is inappropriate, but the other side of you inside, you're just burning, going, and that must be highly confusing to not only you, but to anybody else, in the same situation.
Absolutely. I look at friends of mine who learned that they were autistic earlier in their lives, not always when they were 2 or 3, like sometimes in their teens. They're so much better at acknowledging what their needs are. So, they know what's going to stress them out to the point where they can't speak anymore. They know when something's going to be too draining. And for me, it's often still a kind of afterthought. It's like I'll do an event, or I'll, take a job or go to a party or something, and the next day I'm like, I feel terrible. Like, why did I agree to go to that? I knew it was going to drain me.
Yeah. I feel like that all the time.
Yeah. So I think it's that shame thing. I think people who are given that gift of kind of self-knowledge earlier, there's obviously still kind of aspects of shame in terms of just being autistic in the world, but you don't have that shame of thinking, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, right.
You know that it's not actually something wrong, so to speak. It's just the way your brain is wired. So yeah, it is. It's a really hard kind of, like, the way I always describe it is I inevitably sort of fall back on like movie metaphors. Yeah, it's like, an alien who's sort of come to Earth and is trying to learn the human ways, but the kind of thing that allows you to look human keeps breaking down and sort of show your innards all the time, and it's it's awkward.
When you say that, I think of Jeff Bridges' Starman.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
How good is that movie?
Absolutely.
He's so good, isn't he?
Yeah.
So, Clem, once you had your diagnosis, what changed for you in the romantic way and the relationship way? Did anything change at all?
Yeah, a lot. So I think it just made me recognise the difficulties that I've been having in dating. I think also there was some question marks for me around my sexuality. I'd always identified as bisexual but never really kind of explored that. And so I suppose once I recognised that I was autistic, I sort of realised I hadn't really kind of filled in the rest of the sentence. It was like, I don't really seem to be enjoying dating men. And then it was like ... Oh, so I think I realised that, a lot of what I had kind of experienced in dating was what I sort of thought I had to do, and that's a big thing for everybody. But I think particularly for autistic people, the weight of heteronormativity, things like dolly I mean, I love them, I've still got all my old dollies, but you're given one script to follow, really. And so I kind of went, okay, I get a boyfriend in year 10 and then, on we go. Eventually I'll get married. Well, that didn't happen. But yeah, so I think it kind of gave me also the ability to be a bit more gentle with myself. I think I had just been kind of hitting my head against a brick wall going, why isn't this working? I can't seem to keep a relationship for, a particularly long time. I was ending up with people who were, I think, unscrupulous, so they were sort of targeting me as well. So to be able to step back and go, all right, I'm not so good at spotting dodgy people. I'm interested in dating, across gender. I'm going to go into this with my eyes a bit more open, and it's been really good. It's been good to be able to, in a way, actually, that's one area where I am very good at giving myself those supports that, I don't find a second nature in other kind of aspects of my life, to be able to go, it's okay to take it slow, let's go on a few dates and I'll see how I feel, whereas, I think in my 20s I just sort of rushed in and hoped that everything would work out. So that, I think, was a good little safety net that diagnosis kind of offered me.
Can I ask you, what do we need to know to better communicate with people with autism?
Oh.
The big question.
It is a big question. It is. I think, there's still a lot of fear around autism. I think, don't be scared. And I know it's difficult because, I have colleagues who are non-speaking, or who may sort of verbalise, and it is, it's not an ordinary thing. When we all grow up and we're taught to talk to each other, we're kind of told that, like, speaking with our mouths is the most important thing, and that's the kind of ultimate form of communication. I think that's something that is a really big deal because, autistic people, a lot of kind of pain and energy goes into suppressing things like the fact that we make noises, that we move in unpredictable ways, kind of like huntsmen, it's like, who knows what they're going to do? Whoa, like this idea of, they call it quiet hands, like not flapping our hands or jiggling or things like that. I think being comfortable with that idea of different ways of being in the world. I have a friend and a colleague, Prue Stevenson, she's an amazing autistic artist, and a lot of what she does is, she did this project called Stim Your Heart Out, where she encouraged people to come and basically try, what is, colloquially known as stimming. So things that autistic people do, usually physical. So, shaking their hands, flapping, spinning around on the spot. And I thought, what a great way to get people to recognise that this is not just a thing that autistic people are doing, but it's something that has value, that it's that maybe if we all flapped our hands, we would feel less, stressed, or we would be able to regulate our emotions. So I think that's the main thing, is sort of being comfortable with difference. I think we're enlightened as a whole, maybe I'm optimistic, as a society these days, that we know, you don't stare at a person who's a wheelchair user, you don't stare at somebody who's short-statured. But there's still this sense with autism that it's sort of weird or spooky. So I think that's a huge one, is like meeting autistic people on their terms and not the other way. Because I think, it's a multi-million-dollar industry trying to turn autistic people, for all intents and purposes, into, non-autistic people. And you can kind of do it a bit, but, I think that's what late diagnosis stories tell us, is that it only goes so far, You can kind of squash these experiences down a bit, and eventually you sort of just crumble. So I think that's the thing. I think kind of turning the tables and kind of meeting with autistic people on their level, and being comfortable with that. It's a big ask. But I think like Prue's work demonstrates, and Elle, like you were saying with the Steiner classrooms, I think once people recognise that kind of autistic kind of rules for being in the world actually are quite, good for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think in a way the kind of autistic experience, has a lot to teach us about how to kind of exist in our current modern moment. Like, maybe we don't need to have 5 televisions at the end of every aisle in the chemist, yelling at us about perfumes. Like, maybe that is actually stressful for everybody.
Yep.
So I think just kind of whole scale, paradigm shift of everything that we know as society, really, Cameron.
I reckon the Amish had it right. Just all dress in the same colour and eat the same food. Drive a horse to a buggy to school.
Simpler times.
That's right. And everyone raises a barn on Saturday night.
That's right.
We're quite fortunate in our families, because Cam has a niece and a nephew who are Asperger's, and my nephew is also on the autism spectrum. So we've had close relationships with those. Yours are now grown ups.
Yeah,
My nephew is 12, and it's been interesting watching my sister, understand his diagnosis and watching him navigate his way through the world. And it's given our whole family a much more open awareness of autism in a lot of ways, which has been I think it's really great. It's been really great and positive for our family. Much more accepting. Yeah. He's just a sweetheart of a kid. So how could you not love him? It's just
I think that's the thing, like I think of even if I wasn't autistic, God forbid, like I think of the autistic people in my life and they really enrich my life. They encourage me to think about things in a different way.
Yep.
Different approaches to the world. And I think that's the thing, particularly for parents of kids who maybe have more complex support needs or complex communication needs, they also have strengths. Like that's the thing. And just because they're not Rain Man, winning you millions of dollars at card counting, their way of being in the world is valid. And I think we're starting to get that. There was that Pixar short film, what was it called, Loop, made a couple of years ago, and it was about a non-speaking autistic kid, and they got a non-speaking young woman to come in and do the vocal performance for her, and it's beautiful, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about this other kid who's been, assigned to sit with her in a boat, who just thinks his life is over, who by the end of their, day out on the lake is like, what an incredible kind of engagement with the world around her she has. It's this very real kind of live sense of being in the world. So yeah, I think that's the thing. And there are lots of stats on that. Like most people have a connection to an autistic person.
Exactly.
That maybe they don't know it, or they might not be out or not diagnosed. But we're really, I think these days the number, it's something like 1 in, 60. So the chances are, somebody somebody you love, And if people didn't love us, we wouldn't continue to exist. So, like that's the thing, autistic people I think are also inherently, lovable like anybody else.
I love that you just said, if I wasn't autistic, God forbid. Because I think as we all go through our own version of obstacles in life, as you go through it, you become hopefully more empathetic towards others who are doing the same thing. For me, I had a really debilitating stutter growing up, and it followed me into when I started on telly, and I'd be hosting Perfect Match, and I could see someone when I'd ask them a question, because I was also choosing different words not to stumble over as I was hosting the show. I had to do that in my brain, because I was still being affected by the stutter. So I chose different words to use. But I could see contestants in the lights in front of 350, 400 people about to freak out, on national TV. And I'd go, okay, number 2, why don't you have a think about your answer, I'll go to number 3. And instead of, I guess, picking the low-hanging fruit and putting crap on them, I sort of bounced around it a bit, and more often than not, post-show, I'd have people, that person come up and go, thank you so much. You helped me out in that moment. How did you know? And, I always had to get on to the next show. And so I couldn't really explain. Well, actually, I it started into my own sort of version of what it is. Though I guess what I'm observing with you is whatever we're going through, the difficulties we have, there's value toward it. And I can really see and feel that you have you can find the value in what your life has been. And I think that's where we all can take a lesson from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for anybody listening who's thinking, oh, maybe I might be autistic or kind of reconsidering their relationship with people that they know, that's the thing. It's an experience of life that, for almost a century we were told, let's get rid of this, let's try and find out what causes it, we'll eradicate it. And what a tragedy that would be, not just because of this idea of like, oh, maybe Mozart was autistic and, there are, so I think, the creative arts, science, all of those things are overpopulated by autistic people. But what a tragedy it would be if they didn't exist, even if they never did anything like that. That's the thing. It's the idea that somebody's life has value even if they are not, existing in capitalism, if you like. So, your autistic friend or self, doesn't have to break the Enigma code to have value. I think just the inherent fact of your experience of the world is valuable. And I'm really, I think I'm so happy that I've kind of come out the other side of the diagnosis roller coaster to be able to feel that way about myself now, because it was, hard won, and when you don't know something really important about yourself, you do tend to kind of a self-excoriating, mindset. So to have that peace now is really, really valuable, and I think it's something that I sort of hope to communicate to other people.
Fantastic. Clem Bastow, author of Late Bloomer, How an Autism Diagnosis Changed My Life. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so lovely talking to you. I think it's been really eye-opening, and thank you for sharing everything that you've felt and written and who you are. It's been really lovely.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great to be in the bathroom.
Anytime.
Anytime.
I won't flush you out. You can walk out.
Thanks, Clem.
Thank you.
Clem Bastow, wow, she has a lot to say. So smart.
Yeah, I as I said to her just then, when she said if I wasn't autistic, God forbid, that she absolutely sees the grace in it.
Absolutely.
And the fortune, I suppose, because it's one of those cumulative things that's got her to where she is today.
Absolutely.
And a smart lady.
And I thought the things that you were saying to her were so wonderful. So kudos to you. I just loved when you talked about your experience on Perfect Match and knowing the starter. That's the reason I fell in love with you. Because I watched you were something different on TV because you were so kind. And that's what I loved. You weren't making fun of these contestants. And I remember that as a 16-year-old girl going, he's so lovely to these contestants. And every time they stumbled, you were like, it's okay, don't worry, we'll come back to you. That's the reason I fell in love with you. So, but that's from your understanding of your own stutter and your own feeling of that, knowing that panic. So if we can all embrace that feeling and have the empathy that you had for those contestants that Clem has, it's just a nicer place to live.
It's a really lovely thing to say. Thank you. And you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to that other than thank you. And you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
It is a nicer place to live.
Yeah.
When we just take that moment to, as she said, be comfortable with their difference.
With differences.
With our differences.
Yeah.
Meet them on their terms. Meet people on
their terms. Exactly. It's great advice. Yep.
That's all we've got time for today. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review us. That gets us higher up on the list so we can expand further. And we really appreciate your help with that. And thanks, honey.
Sure.
Thanks for being with us. This has been Separate Bathrooms.
Thanks for listening.